All right, good morning. Today's daf is daf Yevamot, daf Lamed Vav. We are about 10 lines up on the bottom of Lamed Hey and Mebet. Yesterday, we introduced a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish regarding the status of a yibum, or chalitza done with a woman who is pregnant. So, again, Reuven was married to Rachel. Reuven dies without any children. And now Rachel is able to potentially marry Chaim, Reuven's brother. But it turns out that she is pregnant. And the question is if Chaim did Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel, would it be a valid action? Would it be something that would make a difference? And Rabbi Yochanan said, absolutely, it does make a difference. It is considered a valid action. And Reish Lakish says it is not. Yesterday, we talked about and cited our own Mishnah, and we explained how even though our Mishnah says that if a woman turns out to be pregnant, whether she has a child or she doesn't have the child, it seemed like it was according to Rabbi Yochanan. It seemed like the marriage was valid or the chalitza was valid. We saw how actually even Reish Lakish can understand our Mishnah without a problem, because he just understands that it's that when it comes to saying that that the woman is able to marry a Kohen or not able to marry a Kohen, that all those things are essentially chumras, and so as a result, there really isn't any inconsistency with Reish Lakish's position. And so now we continue on this effort to try and see who is right, Rabbi Yochanan or Reish Lakish. By the way, I'll note that in general, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, but we'll find out how we hold in this instance later today. So we are 10 lines up. Second word on the line is Meisvei. Let me just double check that that's right. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I'm sorry, Miboile, excuse me. We're, 1 second, let me just. I'm sorry, so it's the last word on the line. I have here that it's the second word on the line. It's the last word on the line. The last word on the line is Meisvei. Meisvei, Hakones es Yevimto v'nimtzeis mu'beres. So we're going to challenge, now we're challenging actually Rabbi Yochanan's perspective about, again, Rabbi Yochanan says that it is a valid action, Yibum or Chalitza, when the woman is pregnant. And here we have a baraisa that says the following: Hakones es Yevimto v'nimtzeis mu'beres. If somebody married their Yevamah and she turns out that she's pregnant, so harezo lotzina se tzarasa. So then the Yevamahs, so again we have Chaim and Rachel. Chaim has taken Rachel as his wife. Harezo lotzina se tzarasa. So then the Rachel's co-wives are not allowed to marry anyone. Why? Shemiyahe Vlad ben Kayama, because maybe the child will be viable. Well, that doesn't make much sense, or at least it doesn't make much sense on its face, because if the child is viable, so then presumably there was no yibum required whatsoever, in which case the co-wives should go free right away. And if in fact the child is not viable, well then it's a valid yibum. And so as a result, the yibum has been done. And so again, once yibum is done with one of the co-wives, namely Rachel, well then all the other co-wives are able to marry whomever they want. So it seems very odd. And the Gemara picks this up and says, Adarabba, ki habi avlad ben kayama mipatra tzarasa. If the child's viable, well then the woman goes free, or the co-wives go free. So Ella Ema Shema Lo Yeheya Vlad Ben Kayama. Maybe the child will not be viable. The Isal Gadai Bias muberes shma bia. And now, if in fact we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, amai lo tenasei tzarasa, why should the co-wives not be able to marry tipater bivia shel chaverta? The yibum that was done with Rachel by Chaim should suffice to free Rachel's co-wives who were co-wives with her when she was married to Reuven. So Amar Abaye explains that actually we can say that this is not inconsistent with Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Bevia kule alma lopli, and we're going to give actually two different answers. We're going to first take the first answer, and then we're going to reject it, and we'll give a second answer. So Amar Abaye said, so Bevia kule alma lo pligi de lo patra. Really, we're going to revise the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and say that really everybody agrees that yibum with a pregnant woman does not work. So ki pligi b'chalitza, and the only place that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish disagree is with chalitza. So as a result, everybody agrees that yibum doesn't work if you do it with a pregnant woman, but chalitza with the pregnant woman, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is valid, and according to Reish Lakish, is not valid. So, and so that way, that solves the problem here, because the point is that here we have yibum being done with a pregnant woman, and so everybody agrees that it's not valid, and so that's why we are concerned about the co-wives and say that the co-wives are not allowed to marry anyone else because no yibum or chalitza has happened yet. And again, so bias okay, Rish Lakish savar bias all right. So the savar chalitzas, so keep chalitza. So Rabbi Yochanan savar chalitzas muberes shma chalitza, bias muberes lo shma bia. That Rabbi Yochanan says that chalitza is considered valid when it's done with a pregnant woman, but the relations that cause yibum will not be considered yibum. Whereas Reish Lakish says no. Not only is the yibum not a valid yibum, muberes lo shma bias muberes lo shma bia, v'chalitzas muberes lo shma chalitza. Neither the chalitza nor the yibum will work according to Reish Lakish. So Amar le Rava says manavshach. I don't understand. If you want to say that that yibum of a pregnant woman is a valid yibum, chalitzas muberes shma chalitza. Well, then the chalitza should be a good chalitza. Bias muberes lo shma bia. But if you say that it doesn't work, chalitzas muberes nami lo shma chalitza. Basically, Abaye says, Rava says to Abaye, listen, these two laws have to go together. Because we in fact have a principle, and now we turn to Lamed Bavim Nalev. And we say to kol ha'ola liyibum ola chalitza. Anybody who is supposed to have yibum is supposed to have chalitza. And anybody who's not subject to yibum is not subject to chalitza. So either you got to be able to do one, or you got to be able, if you can do one, then you can do the other. And so as a result, we reject, or at least Rava rejects Abaye's answer, and he offers the following: Ella Amar Rava Hachikamer. This is in fact what the Brisa means to say. And indeed, he's going to keep the language of the Brisa. And he's keeping the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish to be both about yibum and chalitza, not just about chalitza. So hakodesh yivim tov b'nimtzis muberes. Again, if somebody marries a yivama and she's found to be pregnant, so harezo lo tinasei tzarasa. So then, this woman's co-wives are not allowed to marry anyone. Why? Shema Yehe Vlad Ben Kayam, because maybe the child will be viable. Uvias muberes lo shma bia v'chalitzas muberes lo shma bia chalitza. And the yibum of a pregnant woman, with a viable child is certainly not going to be a valid yibum, and the chalitza of a pregnant woman with a viable child is not considered chalitza because the child is born. Indeed, there's no yibum or chalitza that's even required. The havlad eino poter ad sheyetzu la'avir ha'olam. However, the problem is that the child doesn't cause the fact that Reuven actually had a child And so as a result, no chalitza is required with either Rachel or her co-wives. Well, that only becomes a physical reality when the child is born. The child doesn't cause the Rachel and her co-wives to be free from the obligation of Yibum until he comes into the world, until he comes into the air of the world. So Tanya Kavasi de Rava. And in fact, we have an explanation. We have a brisa that is consistent with Rava. And again, so for Rava, what he's saying is that the brisa can be read exactly as it is written. And indeed, what it's saying is that the problem is that if the child is viable, well, then it will turn out that that no yibum is required. But until we know that, we can't allow the yibum or chalitza to happen, because it's not going to matter if in fact if the child is viable. And so until the child comes out and is viable, nobody can get married. And so as a result, we have a brisa that is consistent with this teaching of Rava. What does the brisa say explicitly? Hakonis yivim tovanimsis muberes. Again, if somebody marries a yivama and she's found to be pregnant, harezo lotina seitzarasa. Then the yivama's co-wife is not allowed to marry anyone. Why? Shema Yehei Vlad ben Kayama, because maybe the child will be viable. So far, it's exactly the language of the brisa that began today. But now we have the additional language of the Ein Bias V'Chalitza Poteres Ad Ella Vlad Poter. And so as a result, in that situation, the Bia, the Yibum and the Chalitza do not cause the woman and her co-wives to be free, and rather it is the child who causes them to be free. And Vehavlad Eno Potra Ad Shietze La'avir Ha'olam. And the child doesn't cause the women to go free and be able to marry whomever they want until the child is actually born. So again, this second brisa basically says exactly what Rava says the first brisa was intended to mean. So Taima Deshema Yehei Vlad ben Kayama. So what is the reason that you're not allowed to have the co-wives marry anyone? It's because maybe the child will be viable. Well, ha lo havi Vlad ben Kayama mifter tsarasa. Well, one second, that implies that if the child is not viable, well, then the co-wife does become free by virtue of the yibum that was done when the Yevamot was pregnant. So lema teheve tiyuvta de Reish Lakish. So can we say that this is actually a refutation of Reish Lakish? Because again, Reish Lakish says that bias yivamta loshma bia and chalitza yivim. Bias muberes loshma bia and chalitza muberes loshma chalitza. So if in fact Reish Lakish were correct, well then the Rachel and her co-wives should not be free until after she's no longer pregnant, and then Yibum or Chalitza is done. So the implication of this brisa seems to support Rabbi Yochanan and not Reish Lakish. Well, Amar Lach Reish Lakish, Rabbi Reish Lakish would tell you, Hakikatani. Now, the brisa is saying the following. So he effectively is going to reread the brisa so that it is consistent with his view. If in fact one marries the Yevamot Rachel, so Chaya marries Rachel and turns out that Rachel's pregnant, Harezo Lotina Seitzarasa. So Rachel's co-wives are not going to be allowed to marry anyone. Why? Shema lo Yehei Havlad ben Kayama. Because maybe the child's not viable. So again, he is going to read it the way Abaye attempted to read this brisa. V'chalitzas muberes lo shma chalitza, ubias muberes lo shma bia. So if the child's not viable, well, then we have a problem, because even if the child's not viable, it's not considered a good marriage. And if the child is viable, the im tomar helech achar rov nashim, and if you say, well, why don't we just rely on the fact that most women are have viable births, and so as a result, we should assume that this woman who is pregnant, Rachel, is going to have a viable child, and so as a result, Yibum and Chalitza will not apply. The Rov Nashim Vlad Ma'al Yaldan, right? Most children, most pregnant women have viable, healthy children. So the answer is Vlad Ein Poter Ad Sheyetzela Aver Ha'olam. So now explaining the end of that other brisa, the point is that the child does not go free. The women do not go free until the child has come out into the world, and so as a result, the women are stuck as long as Rachel is pregnant. While Rachel is pregnant, we cannot rely on the Yibum because, according to Reish Lakish, Yibum while pregnant is not a valid Yibum, and we cannot rely on the viability of the child because the child has not been born yet. So as a result, Reish Lakish is explaining why nobody's allowed to marry if the Yevamah is pregnant. Yes.
Wait a minute. What if you do, let's say, Chalitza on one of the Tzarot who isn't pregnant?
Yeah, that would potentially no, because effectively what we're saying is that nothing can happen because we don't know. So it's an actually interesting question, right? So we have not actually dealt with this situation, the situation of what happens if one of the co-wives is pregnant and you're doing chalitza on somebody who's not pregnant. It certainly seems like the halacha is focused on, it doesn't make a difference which of the wives you do it on. If any of the wives is pregnant, then you have to wait because so
when we say Chalitzas Meuberes and Bias Meuberes, it's when any of them are Meuberes.
Yes, because exactly, because the problem is that all the issues still exist, right? Because Bias Meuberes, if in fact it turns out that the God is a healthy child, well, then we're going to have a problem because the man is going to the Chaim is going to have sinned because he's not allowed to marry his brother's ex-wife when his brother did have children, and so as a result, we have to wait to see whether or not the Vlad is viable. So I think for sure.
And because you can't do Chalitza.
And then because you can't do Yibum, you can't do Chalitza, right? Exactly. So that would be my understanding of the situation. So not 100% sure of that. It's an excellent question, and certainly implied by this discussion. But it's certainly clear that you can't do Yibum. The question is would Chalitza work? And I think that's a fair question to ask. And so not completely clear as to what would happen in that situation. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Lazar. So now Rabbi Lazar is going to tell us some interesting points. Efshar Isa Lahad Reish Lakish, Lo Tnan La B'Masdisin. Is it possible? So Rabbi Lazar is going to now wonder. Could it be that that Reish Lakish would teach his teaching without a clearer indication of his position among the Tanaim, because here he's arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, and so does it make sense? There's got to be some basis, some additional basis, and some of the commentaries suggest that that Rabbi Lazar is saying this because he understood that the halacha was like Reish Lakish. But let's take a look and see. So Nafgadak va'ashka. So so he went out, he looked at, and he found a potential source for Reish Lakish, Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, there's a Mishnah that we'll see in a couple of months It's on Daf Kuf Yud Tet Amud Aleph. Ha'isha shahalach ba'alav b'tzarasala Medina Sayam. So you have again, Ruvain is married to Rachel. Rachel has a co-wife Leah, and so Ruvain and Leah go overseas. Uvo v'amru la meis balach. And now, unfortunately, the word comes back to Rachel. Sorry to report, your husband died. Harezo lo tinasei at velotis yabim. So now this woman is not able to marry or engage in yibum. So this is actually addressing your question. Okay, why? Ad sheteda shema meuberes hitzarasa. Because we need to find out. We only heard about the husband dying. We don't know what the status of the co-wife is, of Leah is. Maybe she's pregnant. So bishlama yibume lo. It makes sense to say that she can't be taken in yibum shemiyahe vlad ben kayama, because maybe there'll be a viable birth. The yifka be'isser eshes achdo raisa, and that'll be a problem of eshes achdo raisa. Ela lotach lotamai. Why can't they engage in chalitza? So bishlama tachlot besoch tisha betina say betoch tisha lo. Now I can understand why you would not be able to do chalitza and marry the person within 9 months, because hainu suffik, because we got to be careful. We got to be, we have this uncertainty, and we have to, because if the child is viable, then she is not actually free to marry anyone until the child is born. Ela taklos besoch tisha v'tinasei la'achar tisha. But when it comes to doing chalitza within 9 months and then marrying after 9 months, why shouldn't that be allowed? Well, tamech. Well, in second taklos v'tinasei la'achar tisha. So then fine, let her just, and according to the view that it's not valid, right? That the chalitza is not valid. Why not just let her perform chalitza after 9 months? Ela bar minadai. So it must be that to Abaye bar Abba. So a second. So in fact, the fact is that I apologize. So let me back up. Okay. So the point is that why don't we allow her to do chalitza within 9 months and marry immediately after 9 months? Must be like Reish Lakish. So now the Gemara says, no, we're not going to say that this is a good proof that this is like Reish Lakish. Ulatamech, according to you, tachlos v'tinasei la'achar tisha. Let her just wait and do chalitza after 9 months have passed. Ella bar minadahi. Rather, we have to leave this Mishnah out of what our conversation. The Abaye bar Abba, Rav Chinana bar Abaye, the Amri Tarbayu. What do they both say about this situation? Shem Yehe Vlad ben Kayama, v'nimsa ata mitzricha karos l'chuna. Because what are we really concerned about? We want to make sure to avoid the possibility of doing chalitza with somebody who might in fact not have required chalitza. Because our concern is that when you do chalitza with somebody, then that woman is not going to be allowed to marry a Kohen. And so as a result, so we want to be careful and make sure that there is no Vlad, because if there was a Vlad, then there's no chalitza. And so and the woman is able to marry a Kohen because she is only an amana, a widow, and not considered like a divorcee. So one sec. Yes, go ahead.
But didn't we say before that what was it?
That's where the woman herself had the situation.
So
and
we say that we are gozer on the chalitza if the tzaragi has the child, but not her.
Correct. That's exactly what we're going to say. So in second. So why not just have some kind of announcement, right? Right. So the point is Abaye bar Abba and Rofina bar Abaye say, we're going to need to have some kind of announcement in order to allow her to marry a Kohen. So fine, so let it be announced. Well, Dilma Ika Inish Havi B'chalitza V'lo Havi B'chachraza. Maybe somebody will only know about the chalitza that happened to her and not know about the announcements. V'asi Lameimar Kashari Chalutza L'Kohen. And people will think that we are allowing somebody who had chalitza done to her, that we're allowing her to marry a Kohen. And again, the part of the issue is that this prohibition of a chalitza marrying a Kohen is not explicitly in the Torah. And so as a result, if there's an appearance of allowing a chalutza to marry a Kohen, people will think that that's in fact the halacha. So Amar Abaye said to Rabbi Lazar, actually, midi the lo tachlos lotus yabim pitani. 1 second. Your proof doesn't work in the first place because the Mishnah doesn't even actually say anything about chalitza or yibum. It just says lo tinasei v'lotus yabim katani. It says that the person can't marry or do yibum below chalitza without chalitza. About chalitzla, but if in fact chalitza was done, hachinami desharya, maybe in fact she is permitted. So as a result, the proof that we wanted to bring for Rish Lakish is not in fact a good proof, and in fact we're unclear about the situation of chalitza for the woman who's not pregnant, for the co-wife who's not pregnant. And Tanya, but what do we say? Tanya Kavase de Rish Lakish, but we do have a brisa that's considered consistent with Rish Lakish because it says the following: Hacholitz l'mu'uberes. If you do chalitza to a pregnant woman, so then vehi pila, and now she has a miscarry. Tzricha chalitza min ha'achen. She needs a new chalitza. So it's clear that the chalitza does not work. So certainly also the yibum will not work. So Amarava hilchas akubase dereish lakish bahani tlas. And in fact, the halacha is like Reish Lakish in 3 different things. Chada hada amrinan. One is exactly what we just said, namely that the halacha is like Reish Lakish, that chalitza mu'beret loshma chalitza and bia mu'beres loshma bia. So there's no chalitza or yibum with a pregnant woman. What are the other 2? Idach, the first of the other 2 is ditnan hamchalek nechasav al piv. If you have a father who is dividing his inheritance orally, riba echad umiyat leechad, and he's giving a lot to one and less to another. Now we know biblically what is the way that inheritance works. Inheritance works that the firstborn receives a double portion and every other child receives a single portion. And here the father is not following that rule. He's giving some more to some, less to others. He's dividing it as he chooses. V'hishva lahem es ha-bechor, and or he makes the bechor equal to the others. Dvarav kayamin, what he said is valid, meaning that inheritance works. Why? Because it was considered a gift at the time that he was alive. V'im amar mishum Yerusha. However, if he says that all of this is being done via inheritance, lo amar klum. If he says that it's being done afterwards, after death, then he has accomplished nothing. So kasav bein b'tchila, bein b'sof, bein be'emtza, doesn't make a difference whether he writes at the beginning that it's or at the middle or in the end. Mishum matana, if he writes that it's a gift, then dvarav kayamin, then his words are acceptable. So that is a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Bava Basra. And now we have a debate. We turn to Lamed Bava Amud Bet, and we have a debate between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So, and we're only going to say what Reish Lakish says here. The Amar Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish says, La'olam lo kana ad sheyomar ploni uploni yirshu sadeh ploni tu plonit shenisatim lahem b'matana v'yirashum. That and this is as Rashi explains this, that they need to say that I'm giving A and B will inherit X field and Y field respectively as a gift. That works. What is it that doesn't work? If I say A will inherit X field as a gift and B will inherit Y field, then that's going to be, that's going to be a problem. Why is it going to be a problem? Because when I mentioned gift, I mentioned the gift only for one of the children. The father mentioned the gift only for one of the children. And so as a result, that is not going to be a successful series of gifts. And so as a result, that does not work as a valid method of dividing one's inheritance among their children. What does work is only if you say all of it as a gift, and the gift reference can be at the beginning, the middle, or the end, but you cannot have some people, for some people it be referenced as a gift, and for other children it be referenced as an inheritance. That will not work. Okay, V'idach, what about the third of the different rules that is like Rabbi Yochanan? So the third of them, Ditanan, we have another Mishnah in Bava Basra. We have another Mishnah in Bava Basra that says the following: Hakosev kol nechasav livno la'achar moso. If somebody gives as a gift, so again, Reuven, Yaakov has a son, Reuven, and he says, "Listen, Reuven, I'm going to give you this field, but only after I die." So Hakosev kol nechasav livno la'achar moso. He gives his properties to his son only after his death, from that point on. So ha'av eino yachol limkor mipnei shenasanan lebein. The Yaakov no longer can sell his field because he has given the field to his son Reuven. V'habein eino yachol limkor mipnei shehein birshus ha'av. And the son is no longer able to sell the field because it's in the possession of the father. So now when we say that, we really mean that they can't sell all of the rights to the field. So what is it? What happens? Machar ha'av, if the father does sell it, mechurin ad sheyamosu. He's only selling his rights in the field until he dies, meaning that the produce belongs to him, to the buyer until Yaakov dies. Machar habein, if Reuven tries to sell the field, the buyer gets nothing until Yaakov dies, because only after Yaakov dies does Reuven get any rights into the field. Now, that was all the Mishnah. And we said about that Mishnah, Machar haben b'chayei ha'av, umeis haben b'chayei ha'av. What happens if Reuven sells it and then he dies before Yaakov dies? Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kana lo keach. The buyer has bought nothing, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, because Reuven died before ever taking possession of the field, it is as if Yaakov never gave the field to Reuven at all. The Reish Lakish Amar Reish Lakish disagrees, and Reish Lakish says kana lo keach. No, the buyer did acquire something. He still is going to get the field after Yaakov dies. So what is the logic of these two opinions? Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kana lo keach kinyan peros kinyan haguftami. That Rabbi Yochanan says that the buyer didn't actually acquire anything, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, the one who has the rights to the produce of the field is like the owner of the field. And so as a result, as long as Yaakov is alive, he is like the owner of the field. And so as a result, when Reuven, his son, dies, predeceases him, so as a result, he maintains his ownership of the field. The Reish Lakish Amar Kana Lokeach Kinyan, and whereas Reish Lakish says no, the buyer does have a good acquisition because Kinyan Paris Lavka Kinyan Aguf Dummy, because the ownership of the fruit is not like the ownership of the entire field. Just because you have the rights to the profits does not mean that you have the rights to the underlying field itself. And so as a result, that is the third of the three cases. And we say, again, the halacha is like Reish Lakish, that if in fact the son were to sell the field, the field would go to the buyer after Yaakov dies, even if Reuven predeceases his father.
I'm not sure I understood. If kinyan apero lav kinyan haguf dami, that means that
it means that Yaakov's residual rights are not like the ownership of the field. And so as a result, his rights have effectively already passed to Reuven. And so Reuven therefore has full ability to sell the field, not hindered by Yaakov.
And
whereas if you say that Kinyan is Kinyan Aguf Dami, well then as long as Yaakov is still alive, it is as if he truly owns the field. And now when Yaakov dies and Reuven takes it, will Reuven be able to acquire it? Now you may be thinking, isn't this a davar shelo bala olam? But no, basically Reuven is his eventual whatever rights he will at any point in his life have in the field, which is a thing that exists at this moment. And so as a result, since according to the view of Kinyan Paris to Kinyan Haguf Dami, so Reuven actually never takes any full possession of the field because his father Yaakov always had effectively full possession.
Basically what we're saying is, because it feels to me like it's worded kind of the opposite of what we mean, but when we say Kinyan HaPeros Kinyan Haguf Dami, what we're really saying is, since he doesn't have a Kinyan Haguf, he also doesn't have Kinyan HaPeros.
No, since Reuven doesn't have Kinyan HaPeros, he doesn't have a Kinyan Haguf.
But how do we know that he doesn't have Kinyan HaPeros?
Because his father's still alive. And his father still has the rights to the fruit, right? As long as Yaakov is alive, Yaakov has the rights to the fruit. But then
how can Reish Lakish say that he does?
What? Reish Lakish says, Kinyan Paris lav Kinyan Haguf.
Oh, so Reish Lakish says he has a Kinyan Haguf without Kinyan HaPeros.
Correct. Exactly. That's exactly right. The Peros are not considered the guf, and therefore the guf has in fact passed already to Reuven, and so as a result, Reuven's sale is a valid sale. He's already sold the rights to the field after Yaakov has died.
Okay, so it is worded the opposite, but I understand. Because I would say it should say Kinyan Haguf Kinyan HaPeros, because we're talking about a Kinyan Haguf, not a Kinyan HaPeros.
Yes, but the problem is that what we're really saying is, what is it that Yaakov is still holding?
Yeah.
Is Yaakov still holding? When Yaakov gives, again, so Yaakov has given the rights to his field to his son Reuven after he dies. What does Yaakov still have left? Yaakov clearly has the right to eat the fruit on that field. But is that right to the fruit the actual possession of the field, so that Reuven only has a future ephemeral potential right and not anything at this moment? Or do we say that no, the rights to the fruit is not like the rights to the underlying land, and when Yaakov gave those rights to the underlying land for after he dies to his son Reuven, Yaakov has actually transferred actual property to Reuven effectively at this moment. And so Reish Lakish says it has actually transferred real property at this moment, and is now something that Reuven has the ability to sell. And even if he predeceases, that sale is still a thing. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you haven't. Reuven hasn't gotten anything until his father dies. So that's that interesting debate. And God willing, we'll see it when we come to Baba Basra. So now we go back to our Mishnah, and we said Ein Havlad Shel Kayama. If the child's not viable and the person married the woman, well, then he gets to keep her as a wife. And now we're going to get another view. Rabbi Tana, we have a brisa that says Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Amru Yotzi beget. No, he's got to divorce her. Okay, because we don't want to encourage this type of behavior. Chaim should have realized that Rachel was pregnant and never married her. So even if in fact it turns out that the child is not viable, we don't just say, oh, Chaim's lucky. We say, no, we don't want to encourage this kind of behavior. So Amar Rava, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer, Amru Davar Echad. Let's say, maybe I think that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer really said the same thing. So Rabbi Eliezer had to Amran. So Rabbi Eliezer, we just said what Rabbi Eliezer said, namely that we require a divorce. Rabbi Meir is the following. Tanya, we have a brisa that says the following: Lo yisa adam mu beres chavero minekes chavero. A man's not allowed to marry the pregnant ex-wife of another person, or a nursing ex-wife of another person, of another man. The im nasa, and if he did marry her, yotzi below yakser olamid. He's required to send her away, to take her out, and he's not allowed to return her ever. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim omrim yotzi ulechashiyagia zmano lichnos yichnos. He has to take her away, but he's not. And when it's time for him to marry, he can marry her again. So Amar le Abaye mimai, right? So a second. So why do we think that this is aligned? Because what did we say Rabbi Eliezer said? Rabbi Eliezer said in the case of our Mishnah, where if you marry a pregnant woman, you have to divorce her, even though even if the child ends up being not viable. So to here, Rabbi Meir says that if you marry a pregnant woman, you have to divorce her, and you're not allowed to. And if you didn't, right, even if you did marry her, you have to divorce her, and you're not allowed to ever take her back. Meaning, even if in fact the child wasn't a good child or ever, you can never take her back. So must be Rabbi Meir would say the same thing in our case. Well, Amar le Abaye would say, Mimai, not really comparable cases. Dilma Lohi, you don't have to say that they align. Why? Because Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer hacha ela mishum dekapaga be'isur eishes achdo raisa. In our case of our Mishnah, where we're talking about a brother Chaim taking his brother's wife Rachel, taking Reuven's wife Rachel as a yibum. Well, if in fact it's not yibum, if Rachel's child is viable, that would be a biblical prohibition, because biblically you're not allowed to marry your brother's ex-wife. Okay, Abal Hassam. But in the case where we're talking about marrying somebody, a pregnant ex-wife of somebody on the street, or a nursing ex-wife of somebody on the street, that's not a biblical prohibition. There's no biblical prohibition. Hassam d'Rabbanan, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. And Kirabanan Svirale, and it could be that Rabbi Eliezer would say that the rabbis say that in fact, like the Chachamim say, that you can marry her again. Inami, and we can go in the other direction. We don't even have to say that Rabbi Meir agrees with Rabbi Eliezer, because maybe Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Meir Hassam over there. Rabbi Meir said his statement that that when you marry a pregnant woman off the street, or a nursing woman off the street, that you're going to have to divorce her. That's only because Ela Mishum D'Rabbanan. That's because he is protecting a rabbinic decree. And sometimes the rabbis instituted greater protections for their words more than they would protect the Torah words. But here, the problem is Doraisa. So Mifresh Parshim, everybody knows that you need to stay away. So we don't need a special rule to require divorce in that case. So as a result, no, you cannot say that actually Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir are the same opinion. Amar Rava, V'divrei Chachamim Yotzia Beget. Now, when it said in to the Chachamim that you had to take her out, what did it mean? And Rabbi Rava is saying it means that he has to take her out with a decree of divorce. And so Amar Marzutra says, Daikanami, we can actually say that this is implied by the language of our brisa, because the katani yotzi, he must take her out. The lo katani yafrish, and it doesn't just say separate. Separate would imply that they can remain married. Take her out implies that she needs to actually get divorced. Shema mina, and so as a result, the Gemara says that is a reasonable inference. And in fact, we're going to say that even the Chachamim would say that if you marry somebody who is pregnant or is nursing, you need to divorce them until the later time when you can remarry them. So now you may be wondering, well, what happens if the husband is a Kohen? Because if the husband is a Kohen and he has to divorce his wife, he's never, so again, as a reminder, a Yisrael who divorces his wife is allowed to take her back and marry her again, as long as she hasn't married someone in the interim. But a Kohen who divorces his wife is not allowed to take his wife back, because he's not allowed to marry a divorcee, even a divorcee of his action. So what are we going to do in this case? What happens if the husband is a Kohen and now he's divorced his wife who was either pregnant or nursing with somebody else's child, and now he wants to take her back? What do we do in that case? Well, if you want to find out about that, stay tuned to tomorrow.
Okay, thank you guys. Have a good day, everyone.
All right, keeping you all in suspense. Have a wonderful day. Be well.